Okay, hi, we're just, hi Yvette, we'll just give it a couple more minutes. Hi Joanne. Give it a couple more minutes for people to arrive. Okay, I'll just kind of read the kind of introductory housekeeping stuff. I'm sure you're all familiar with it now, but we will be having 3 20-minute presentations, and we will go consecutively through the presentations, and we will have the Q&A at the end. So that's just the format that's been used for the conference. So if you have your questions, if you have questions that you want to ask about, particularly about the first or the second ones, then please make sure you make a note of those. You can do that yourself, or you can do it in the chat. I'll make sure that I capture those, and if you're happy to ask the questions yourself at the end, or I can ask questions for you. During the Q&A, also you can raise your hand, use that method. Please can I ask you to keep your microphones off unless you are speaking, and I think that's probably it. Just to let you know as well, which I'm sure has been the case in most sessions, that this session is being recorded, but the Q&A will not be recorded. Okay, well, just so we make sure that we keep to time, I'm going to invite our first presenter, and that is Rila Rapa from University of Durham. And Rila is going to talk about student support as a social network, exploring non-traditional student experiences of academic and wellbeing support during the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, thank you very much. Want to take it away?
That's great, and thank you, Kate. And I assume you can all see my screen. If somebody just gives me a sign.
Yes, we can.
Yeah,
yes,
that's brilliant. Thank you. So thank you very much for this warm welcome, and thank you for everyone who's here today on Friday late afternoon. But yes, so what I'll be doing is I'll be sharing some of the work that I undertook with my colleagues, Chris Brown and Anna Llewellyn from the School of Education at Durham University last year, to explore how a group of students experienced challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the types of support networks that were available to them. So it was quite an interesting project, and what I actually did yesterday as part of the conference program is I was speaking about some of the follow-on work that we're doing. So I might come to that in a Q&A session. So we're trying to kind of take this work forward and thinking about how could we make a positive impact and so on. But this is the actual project that we did. So what I will do, I will start with some of the contextualization and our kind of thinking around how we conceptualize student support. I'll tell you a little bit about the project and then some of those findings and implications as well. But first of all, I think, there's been quite a few presentations that I have seen this week as well that have been speaking about the effects of the pandemic on higher education more generally, but also in terms of what does it mean for students from different backgrounds and so on. And I think it's quite fair to say, and this presentation clearly echoes the kind of the similar chaotic influences that the pandemic raised and that are still ongoing in terms of the financial sustainability issues that emerged early on in terms of what the universities were concerned about, that how do we assure the high student numbers that is necessary to run the university, all of that kind of the marketized side of the things, but also kind of from a pedagogical side of things, the concerns around the modes of teaching and what is good enough in terms of remote teaching, and how do we do our practices in most inclusive, fair and supportive ways. Then questions around student experience. What does it mean to be a student within a kind of now probably hybrid spaces, but previously and during lockdown in a very kind of remote and online spaces, and what support then is available for students, and what support should we or could we provide to students within the context when the kind of physical university campus is dissolved or dissolved for a bit. And that got us really interested in particularly those student experience and support elements. And also kind of, there were lots of discourses from very early on in the kind of the first lockdown and the phase of the pandemic, when the concerns were raised in relation to pandemic and widening participation. Even the University of UK was arguing that the cold spots in higher education would increase, and there is clear need for developing support mechanisms. And Sutton Trust was also speaking about the similar kind of effects that could be expected. And what obviously didn't happen, or what we haven't seen happening, would be that sector-wide response to thinking about how do we deal with widening participation, how do we support from different students, different backgrounds, when some of those, maybe the most conventional practices, kind of disappeared or got disrupted. So basically that made us ask those questions that I've listed in this on the slide as well. And I'll tell you a little bit how we how we ended up with those questions, because when I speak about the project, I'll also highlight that our initial thought was not to go after non-traditional students per se, but the students who volunteered to take part of this project were very much self-identifying as non-traditional one or the other way. And that's how the project became part of the more of the kind of widening participation angle to it. But we were interested in how those students then experienced the COVID-19 crisis, what challenges they encountered, but also then what types of academic and well-being support networks those students had and engaged with during the pandemic to overcome some of those challenges. So that became the focus of the project. And also we kind of very much emphasized and sympathized with Marginson's kind of view of the pandemic as a mirror of sorts, as a means of common reflexivity, that it kind of not only enforces the inequalities that happen, but it also reveals, accelerates, showcases, and it's a time to pause and reflect and to think about that, what's wrong within the context, and what is the pandemic even kind of further disadvantaging, and all of that stuff that really got us interested in. So that's the kind of the context. Then obviously we looked into the emerging research that has been done in terms of looking into students and the COVID-19 and so on, and we could see that a lot of the existing research was already highlighting some of those challenges that students were experiencing. And often they were categorized within those three broad categories related to educational challenges, things that students experience in terms of their learning and teaching, and issues around learning resources and so on, emotional challenges in terms of the mental well-being and health and safety of themselves and people that they were their close contacts and so on. And then also environmental challenges, which relate to particularly study environments and study spaces and things like that. And it became particularly interesting to look at how those environmental challenges were emphasized for non-traditional students or students from disadvantaged backgrounds. And research was already highlighting that the more people live in the same household, the biggest the likelihood that it's the study space becomes an issue for students in terms of being able to focus or having the suitable resources to engage with successfully with their studies. Also, colleagues Igor Zhirikov and others from Berkeley were looking into how students from disadvantaged backgrounds, particularly first-generation students with caring responsibilities, working class students, how they experience that kind of lockdown or being sent back home or their permanent residences, and argued that financial hardship has increased for students from those backgrounds, that they had less suitable and also less safe study environments, which was particularly important to emphasize as well, that some students were unsafe within the context that they were meant to continue studying, and universities provided very little support or solution for those cases, also increased mental health concerns and so on. So there was quite a lot of kind of hints around the environmental challenges that could become an important theme also in our project. So now in terms of the support, what we also looked into and thinking about how would we conceptualize student support, and there's quite common approaches to student support that draw on Alan Tight's work, and it kind of serves its purpose in terms of helping to understand those different kind of aspects of support. And often those aspects that get looked at within that support relate to cognitive support, which are kind of to do with learning and teaching and educational resources and so on. Affective support, which relates to health and well-being, and particularly supporting students' mental health and so on, and counselling services. And then systemic support, which TIDE categorizes as administrative support and infrastructure in universities to support students. But the problem with those approaches often is that they promote the kind of deficit notion of support, that certain groups of students lack certain types of rights, culture and social capital, so that the universities need to have kind of packages in place to fill the gaps and support students then when those issues emerge. Now, it serves certain purposes, but it has limitations. And early on, we got inspired by Jacqueline and LaRich's approach to student support, which critiqued some of those kind of traditional or conventional ways of looking at the student support. And they promote an idea of student support as more dynamic, socially situated, and complex prose that is kind of relative, where student support needs and support that is available to them is related to their social background, where support exists in interactions with other people and with the context that students are within. So we got really inspired by that type of kind of dynamic idea of student support. And we thought of expanding that and thinking about student support as something that comprises of social networks, kind of as a set of relevant actors that are connected to each other by one or more relations. And for example, Wellman speaks about communities existing in networks. And I think that applies quite well to student communities as well, to looking into student communities as something that is, kind of operates in networks and made of different actors that are connected to each other. And if you look into student support as networks, there would be a flow of various student support. It could be study resources, it could be information supplies or acts of kindness. And you'll see from when I get to the data as well, what that would mean in family context. So we very much started to look into student support as social network, something that is dynamic, something that is relational, something that is situational as well. So that was our approach to student support as social network. Now, a little bit about the project. So as I said, it was a kind of exploratory project. It was small scale, only involving interviews with 10 students within Durham context, within social sciences. So what we originally did was we reached out to students from social sciences and also used the first generation student groups in social sciences, because that's the network of first generation scholars in Durham is quite well established. So we used that as well. And when we reached out to students, we emphasized that we would like to really get students from different backgrounds and with diverse experiences to volunteer to take part of this research. But what happened that the students who got in touch with us were very much self-identifying themselves as non-traditional. And non-traditional in terms of this, I put here kind of definition that we borrowed from Christie's work as well, where they defined themselves as being obviously working class, or I'm from a working class background, or this idea, some of the students were mature students. We had 2 students, mature students. We also had students who came with access course, who defined themselves as first generation, where the parents or siblings had not been to university. So there was a very strong story that came with those students. And that's how we kind of refocus the project and thinking about that. Okay, when we speak about student needs, support needs and student support, we really need to give credit to those student stories and how they self-define themselves within that project. And methodologically, we very much took into that egocentric network approach. So rather than looking into how students within a particular context are all interrelated as within a whole network approach, we took every single student as a case on their own and looking into obviously kind of their background, their story, but then who forms the support network for those students, but from a very qualitative perspective, because we conducted interviews rather than kind of conventional egocentric surveys and so on. But that was the kind of the project as such. Now I'll introduce a little bit some of the key themes or findings as well. And here, before I do that, are a few links of the publications that were written from this project as well, and that give a kind of stronger grounding into our conceptualization of student support and the methodology and so on. But now to the findings. So first of all, before kind of chasing some of those support networks, it's important to kind of acknowledge some of those issues that they experience, the key theme obviously was emotional distress and well-being, and uncertainty and worry about themselves, but also worry for the others, for their family, for their friends, and so on, and anxiety. And like the quotes here show as well, this kind of almost not being able to explain why one was feeling down or one was feeling anxious or worried, but this idea of being feeling like crying every day or feeling more stressed, and that was characteristic to all of those students. And I guess that's what other projects that I've come across that also highlight this kind of heightened levels of stress and anxiety that has been triggered within those changes in during the pandemic, and its effects of what it means to be a student, and how that works out in their daily lives. So one aspect, the challenges that they experienced was to do with emotional distress, but also as I mentioned from the previous work, the space and the idea of environmental challenges, that was also highlighted quite a lot by our students in terms of a sense of loss of a university as a place, and also place within which the studying was structured. And while the home study space became the key environment within which all kind of daily activities were conducted, then there was a lack of resources and negotiation of space. We had students, I don't have a quote here, but we had a student who studied from a bathroom because that was the only quiet space, or one space that you could claim during certain hours of the day to get that kind of quiet space. And then I have a couple of quotes here that how kitchen table became a place that was negotiated, and that student was living with a father and a brother who were key workers. So they claimed the kitchen table when the rest of the family was out doing their jobs and so on. And then also another example here from needing to share their own study space with a mum who was a key worker for the NHS. So because that was the only quiet space, so the mum needed that space as well, because now everybody was in the same household and so on. So that was quite characteristic in terms of needing to negotiate and share that space. And also within that with the issues around Wi-Fi and kind of connection issues. So it wasn't just the physical space as such, it was the materiality was made of many different things within that context. But now looking into where did students get support from? So first of all, where they didn't get support from was formal university services. And it was interesting that quite a few of them actually said how much they relied on, let's say, on counselling or student support services in the university during normal times.
5 minutes, right?
Yep. Thank you. And then what they kind of highlighted how the pandemic had an effect on that. So for example, the first quote indicates how having a very stressful experience, the student was actually reaching out to GP because, as far as she was aware, the university was closed. So this idea of that when teaching was shifted to online, when students were sent back home, and then clearly university was closed and all of the services and support dissolved. So that kind of sense. And also another student was speaking about academics here who were kind of the middleman often between the formal support and how students reached that, and arguing that that academics themselves didn't know what was going on. So how could they signpost to that support? So there was this kind of a lot of sense of how support became kind of dissolved. And what happened within that context then was that the informal support of family members and friends became the key source of support for those students. And we thought that was particularly important to emphasize, because often those non-traditional families are stigmatized as not lacking the right type of support or lacking the right type of economic, social, cultural capital. But there was enormous well-being support that came from there. And first of all, I just kind of want to highlight that some of that support was very kind of sentimental or very kind of small scale, like parents offering cups of teas or cooking meals, and students were highlighting how important that was. But also this idea of while it was impossible or difficult to share any of the academic challenges with family members who hadn't been to university, they were the ones who were able to comfort. And they were the ones who were able to still listen to that experience of stress. So that was very important as well. And then within that context, where the academic challenges were needed to be discussed in terms of assessments and so on, this is where the friends came in. And they used the term friend, which we then had to trace that what do they mean by friends? And those friends were actually their fellow students or course mates from the same course. But they weren't just any peers from that course. They were the ones who were the closest. They were the ones who also constituted friends. So the network itself was actually very small. And similarly, with any kind of academic contact those students had was with academics, they had established strong contacts. And that's how they became almost like well-being support, like the first quote here, that having a conversation with a module tutor about their well-being, that how each of them was actually doing. So that became really important in terms of how students had set up that kind of support or that kind of network already before the lockdown in some ways happened, and then they kind of relied on that very small network of support. But the family members were the key for the well-being. And just wrapping up, just a couple of notes to say that in terms of what we were thinking is to do with the kind of shifting away from the deficit notions of support in terms of what the role of family is within non-traditional student experience, the importance of those close relationships then within student support, but also the reciprocity and dynamics of support. That's about providing and receiving support. It's not just student support services that are delivering that, but it's how support gets constructed within those crisis situations, which is really interesting. And in terms of practical implications, we've just highlighted a few in terms of how important the mental health support obviously was, but raising awareness of that formal support that actually existed. And that's where our current work is in terms of some of the work we want to take forward and how we're developing the student support networks app and things like that I was discussing yesterday, but can highlight a little bit more with a Q&A session if you'd like. But I'll stop here, leaving time for others as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much. That's perfect timing, beautiful timing. Thank you. Okay, so as I said at the beginning, if you have questions about that presentation, please either make a note yourself or put them in the chat, and we will make sure that they get raised in the Q&A. So thank you very much, Rita. That was great, really interesting. Okay, I can now we'll now move on to our second presentation. And this is Catherine Waddington and Brian Bonaparte from the University of Westminster. And they're going to be talking about developing compassionate pedagogical practice with students as co-researchers. So, Catherine and Brian. Would you like to share your screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Not that one. Let's try it.
Douglas, can you take the spotlight, move the spotlight onto Catherine and great, thank you.
Okay, ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time to listen to what we've got to talk to you about today. I'm Catherine Waddington and Brian's obviously sitting next to me. And really what we want to talk about today is going to be quite an interactive session. We've both done our COVID tests and we've both got the window open, so we feel quite comfortable sitting close to each other. Is talk about some work in progress that we're doing with colleagues here at Westminster for a Society for Research in Higher Education funded project. Recently, I edited a book that we have with colleagues, both at Westminster and externally, called Towards the Compassionate University. And all of the royalties go to the charity Student Minds. So if you can persuade your libraries to get an e-copy or a hard copy, or get one for yourself on Kindle, there's some really excellent resources in there. And we're wanting to do with our project is put some of those resources into practice. It's a very practical project. We want to create with students as co-researchers, some very practical tools that can be used in the classroom, in seminars, with personal students, in inductions for new staff. So by way of an introduction, we're both psychologists, and thinking, feeling and doing are the absolute essence of psychology. And we're going to be talking about innovative use of Nancy Kline's thinking environment, which Brian is going to introduce, as a way of approaching our reflective practice and collecting data with our students. Briefly, the project's been in 2 parts. This semester, we've been reflecting on our own practice in the classroom with students and embedding compassion into learning and seminar materials. And the work with students as co-researchers actually starts next semester and in semester 3, and I'll wrap up with that so you can get a sense of what we're doing. So as a university, we have compassion as one of our core values. So in our strategic plan, we say at Westminster, we're thoughtful and sensitive, supportive and encouraging, making time to talk, especially when the pressure is on. A university community, we're inclusive and united and careful to consider what enables each and every one of us to play our part. So we think it's really important when students come to our university and people work in our university, that there's a real sense of compassion that is really embedded in everything that we do. So what's really important is thinking about talking and dialogue and listening. I'm just going to, before I hand over to Brian, it's just a couple of what I'm calling health warnings. There's a real danger that what I'm calling the compassion turn in higher education could actually, if it's not done critically and reflectively and thoughtfully, become a bit of a flavour of the month, a little bit of a kind of buzzword. You've only got to listen in politics, and politicians will have, oh, I'll have a side order of compassion with that speech, just to kind of soften the blow a little bit. So it's really important that it's genuine and that it's felt. And it's also really important to think about, it mustn't become commodified like lots of things in the neoliberal university. And if we ever get inklings of a compassion excellence framework, then we've completely lost the plot. So the term compassion comes from the Latin word to suffer with, or the Latin root to suffer with. And essentially it means noticing suffering, noticing struggling, feeling empathy, and really importantly, doing something about it, taking action. But because we want to be critical about this, we've got some challenges to the use of the term suffering. So I'm going to hand over to Brian now to give a bit of an update on that and some practical work. So we can take the screen down.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Kathleen. So much of what we're going to speak about over the next few minutes stems from Time to Think, which is a tune from Nancy Kline. It's also the name of her organization on leadership development. But it's fair to say that everything we do begins with thinking. A key factor in whether people can think for themselves efficiently is how they are being treated by the people that are around them while they are trying to think. So this is what determines the thinking environment. And there are 10 behaviors or components of a thinking environment. So attention, equality, ease, appreciation, encouragement, feelings, information, diversity, incisive questions, and place. I think most of them are fairly self-explanatory in their natural understandings, but I just want to emphasize the final one, which is place, and just sort of paraphrase how Nancy Kline describes this. So when the physical environment affirms our importance, we think more clearly and boldly. So when our bodies are cared for and respected, our thinking improves. So thinking environments are places that say back to people, you matter. And I think I can't really think of more important environments where it's essential that our students feel that they have a place where they feel they matter. And so to embody these components, is to be a thinking environment for people around you. And I think, as again, just to emphasize, within an educational environment, this is essential in terms of how people want to be able to feel. So to apply the components to the structures of learning, but also work, in work environments as well, because although students are coming to study, those that are teaching them are within their work environments. So using these structures with people in either pairs or in groups, and we're going to do a brief dummy run, so to speak, of thinking pairs, thinking environment. And to do this is to improve the quality of everyone's thinking and of the overall outcome of our interactions. So what that means is creating a thinking environment not only produces the best practical results of people's time together, it also dignifies, it also lifts and lets soar the human mind and spirit. And that might sound grand, but that is the reality. So we think best when we're in the presence of those that are helping us to enhance how we are thinking. And we think least well when we are constricted, when we are inhibited from being able to think more clearly. So Catherine and I are going to create a small thinking environment known as thinking pairs. So it involves the thinker, the person that's doing the talking, and a partner, the person that's listening. On this occasion, this is going to be me. But this is listening to understand rather than simply listening to reply. And I'll repeat that, because in most instances, when we're in discussions with people, if we think about it clearly, what we're really doing often is we're listening to someone tell us something so that we can see where our opportunity is to step in, to say, yes, I know what you're talking about, and this is what happened to me, and so forth. So in many occasions, we're looking at how can we reply to what they're saying with good intention, because often what we're trying to do is to think, okay, how can I let them know that I am paying attention to them? So if I stop and if I say, yes, that's right, and this, that's letting them know that I'm engaging with them. But actually, it's important, it's essential to listen to understand. And there are gender dynamics around that. There's research out that says that men aren't actually really that good at listening to understand. They're good at listening to reply because they're trying to solve the situation rather than just listening to understand. But we'll leave that type of research for another day. So to do this, to create this thinking pairs, we have to be talking about attention. And I'm talking about attention as an act of creation. So attention from one person generates thinking in the other person. And so what we're really talking about here is listening, but transformative listening, which comes from a genuine interest in where the person will go to next in their thinking. So it comes from a level of courage to trust their own intelligence. So in practice, the general behavior that is needed to be adopted when we're talking about creating this thinking environment just within these pairs is to be in a relaxed state, to settle back, to keep your eyes on the eyes of the person that is speaking. Try to cultivate a level of fascination. In other words, this person is going to share something with you that you do not know. So you're fascinated to learn more of what they're going to say next, to be able to achieve a composure that is dynamic, wildly dynamic in actual fact, and not to interrupt. And to trust that not uttering a word is actually one of the most effective things that you can do. So knowing that your job is to help that person to think for themselves, not to think for them. And that an expression of feelings is often part of the thinking process, but without needing to actually necessarily say something. So it's also about being aware that much of what they say will often be the result of your effect on them. So that reassurance of knowing that they're not going to be interrupted is the essence of comfortability, of knowing that they matter, knowing what they're about to say has relevance. So in the quiet presence of your attention, there is respect, there's ease. Important things can happen, not just for the person talking, but for the person that is thinking as well. Fresh ideas can emerge, confusion can dissipate, feelings, sometimes painful feelings, can subside, and creativity, ideally, can develop. So it doesn't matter whether you think you know what the person will say before they say it. And I'm sure we've all been in that situation where we're almost ready to interrupt someone because we kind of think we know what's coming. But it's essential not to interrupt them. What matters is what happens from them because they are saying it. And the freedom to know that everything they say is going to be acknowledged is priceless. So, well, we're going to do this for, typically when you would do this, you would swap each pair being able to, so the thinker and the listener, and you take it in turns. But we're just going to do a one direction session for approximately 3 minutes. And I'm going to set a timer. Set. Okay, so Catherine, what do you want to think about?
I want to think about some of the feedback that we got from students last week when we asked them to identify what a compassionate university would look like through students' eyes. And I've just got one post-it. We got lots and lots from students last week as part of the seminar activity. Intervention from staff where they see someone struggling or isolated. And that really got me thinking and reflecting about the fact that I do know that for you, Brian, students may not necessarily feel comfortable being cast in the role of suffering because of the associations of suffering with victimhood. And so I'm beginning to think about how we need to use students' words to define what they mean by compassion when it's seen through students' eyes. So intervention from staff. So for me, that says a lot about compassion, because as we know, compassion without action is just kind words. And looking at this again from staff in relation to which staff, academic staff, front of house staff, cleaning staff, it's everybody. Compassion is everybody's business. But also the thing that I'm really thinking about is the noticing piece. I'm often struck, I've got a Finnish friend called Hanna-Lee, and when I've been in Finland with her, she'll say we'll go to the woods and pick berries, and she said, but you need to know the ones that you can eat and the ones that you can't eat. And I think it's really important in universities, if you're going to notice something, you need to know what it looks like and what it feels like. And therefore, sometimes you need to ask questions. And that's taken me to reflect on a student saying to me a little while ago, you know, we were all really stressed in our seminar group. This was about 2 years ago. And it just would have been really nice if the seminar group leader had noticed and said, look, you're all looking really tired. Are you okay? Just taking that little bit of time, thinking from the previous one, those small acts of kindness are really important. So I think for us, it's identifying those small things, but also asking the questions.
Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate you sharing that. Is there any other thoughts or feelings or anything else that you want to add to that?
Can I just interrupt and say you have 3.5 minutes left? Sorry.
Okay. That we can carry on this conversation later on with a bit more time. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. So just to close then, if we've only got a few minutes left. So at the end of that thinking pair, we would generally swap. But when Catherine had stopped, it was important to recognize, to show appreciation for what she had shared, but also then to give her a final opportunity to add anything further, just in case that she felt guilty by taking up that space. Because it is unusual for us to feel completely free to share this, not to have to share the stage, so to speak, with anyone else. We assume that someone else is going to have to say something. So it's about reconfirming that not only what she had to say was valuable, but there was an opportunity just to reconfirm any other final points that she had. So this practice, it's not practical in many sort of lecture rooms or seminars, but we know it can be facilitated in smaller groups because we have done this. So not just within pairs. The key take-home message, I think, is that just the mere awareness and understanding of being able to create a thinking environment is sufficient. It moves us away from this sage on the stage perspective that we have within school, within higher education as well, to one of acknowledged mutual compassion that facilitates empowerment for everyone in that environment, not just the students, but the educators as well.
If I can just wrap up, we've just given you a tiny taster. We'll be running 3-hour workshops with our students as co-researchers to gather stories of compassion using exactly that in thinking pairs. And for the final reflections, given that psychology is about thinking, feeling and doing, we'll be ending those workshops with an evaluation, and it's a link into the next session, of head, heart and feet. The head is, what am I thinking and what did I learn? The heart is, how am I feeling? And the feet is, what will be my next steps, my next actions? So thank you for listening to us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. That was fascinating. Okay, thank you, Catherine and Brian. Remember to record your questions either on the chat or in your own notes. While we move on to our final presentation for today, which is Naomi Braithwaite of Nottingham Trent University. And Naomi is going to be talking about if shoes could talk, how a student-led research project generated collaboration, peer learning, and the co-creation of knowledge. So let me do, Douglas, we need
thank you.
We need Naomi. There she is. Okay, great.
Has it come up, the PowerPoint? Can you see?
Yes, it has. Yes, go
amazing.
ahead.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you, everyone. It's lovely to be here on a Friday. In my presentation today, I'm going to be talking to you about the development of I guess it's like a pedagogical approach. It's called the Virtual Shoe Salon, and I will explain why it is called the Virtual Shoe Salon in a little while. But it was an approach that I designed and implemented during COVID, initially as a way to find a more sort of personalized, interactive, creative way for teaching students, primarily in fashion business courses, how to do primary research, qualitative research in a more creative, real world way, I guess. So it's about learning how to do research, but also then generating data and then how to make sense of that data. So it was about a practical way of doing that, But also from that, it was also with my intention was to create a student-led research project as well, so the Shoe Salon is a data set as well as an approach. So in the paper, I'm going to talk to you a bit about my reason for doing it, how I've done it, and also show you some of the findings, which I think are the really exciting bits. So, okay, but I do want to give a little bit of context. So I'm sure as in many of your universities as well, we've been through so many curriculum reviews. It seems like it's happening all the time. And one of the things that we've been charged to think about in more recent times is really finding a much more creative approach to teaching, a more personalized way of doing it. And then for me, as a lecturer that works primarily on sort of building research skills and data skills, how I could then take that and think about how I could apply it in that context. But also being an interdisciplinary researcher myself, I wanted to do something that, yeah, would be fantastic in the fashion courses I teach, but also could apply beyond that as well, to have an interdisciplinary appeal. And again, really thinking about how I can engage students in that peer learning, so they're learning from each other and getting fantastic skills for their degree, but also that they can take with them when they leave. And as I said, using all of that to create a research project that then can be used by students as they continue to learn and so on. So that's kind of the educational context, but I did want to sort of give a little bit of background from my own research, because that really drove me to why I look particularly at shoes and use shoes as a tool in teaching. So quite a few years ago now, I started a research project called Shoe and Tell. And as an anthropologist and an ethnographer, I'm fascinated in the relationship between footwear and identity. So for my own research, I photograph people's feet in shoes and I interview them about what the shoes mean to them. And I've been particularly in the last few years working with students as well. So when they first come to university, they come to an interview with me, they bring a pair of shoes and really talk about what it means to them, how they feel when they wear it. So it gives a sense of what the shoe says about them, but also it gives, just be on to the next slide, it gives a sense of their experience as well of being a student. So it's a document that reveals so many exciting things. So this is one of the students I interviewed in her first, actually at the end of her first year at Birmingham Uni. So she bought these white Air Force because everyone else was wearing them, that sense of, you know, the student identity fitting in. She talks about how she cares for them. But also there's a sense of, you know, she has them because her friends have them, but also they feel like her, so that sense of what it represents as well. I just got another one to quickly show you. This is another student I interviewed I think in her very first week of coming to Nottingham Trent. And she chose to bring a pair of shoes that had defined her gap year before she'd come to university. So they were really important for her. They were biographical. So we have the document of her shoes, but also what they mean to her and her experience. And in her first week of university, that's such an emotive and important thing to have that memory. So I've been doing this research for many years, collecting this data, and I use it a lot in my teaching. Before I wanted to just actually pause for a moment, sorry, and justify why I look particularly at shoes, because I do never, ever deny that clothing is not incredibly meaningful, emotive, powerful, communicative, expressive, and all of that. But for me, the shoe is, and picking up from the last talk as well with the feet, you know, the next step. For me, the shoe is the most kind of ubiquitous object of modern life that we wear. And it has such an impact on us as wearers, because how the shoe is made, its materiality, its physicality, it imparts certain gestures on our posture and how we move. It is that primary mediator between us and the ground upon which we walk. So it doesn't just look a certain way, it feels a certain way, and that feeling is really emotive and powerful in eliciting stories of emotions, experiences, memories, and so on. So that's sort of my justification for shoes. And theoretically, I frame my research, and also how I developed the virtual shoe salon is within material culture. So really recognizing that the power of objects is active, not passive things, that through which relationships and negotiated experiences life is made sense of, if you like. So and shoes, as Belk says here, they're not just the expression of self, they're also an extension, and the idea that they are this repository of memory. And that's been really important in my own research, and as I've seen the virtual shoe salon develop and I've collected the data, I've seen even more significantly this idea of shoes as a repository of memories, and I'll show you some of those findings in a moment. So taking my own research, which I've used for many years in lecture formats, presented my findings, I've really sort of started to recognize, the opportunity of what I do and how it could offer something to students to learn through, real world data, collect their own data. And whilst not everybody, of course, is going to feel as passionate about shoes as I do, but we all pretty much own shoes and wear shoes, so they have a function in our lives, and because of that reason they have something to say about us, our experiences of life, whether that's a very conscious or maybe a less sort of inner, deeper meaning. So I saw that opportunity, and then the process that I do with my own data collection, I saw it as something that could be translated for students. It's experiential, it's collaborative, and also, shoes are relatable. So I saw my sort of development of the virtual shoe salon as something that would foster interactive and collaborative conversations in the digital space. And as we heard in the previous the first session, this was really fundamental. We found in our first, for our first years going into COVID, they had such a short time in the classroom, and we noticed how difficult it was for them in the online space to build that sense of community, sense of belonging and sharing. So there were often those sort of tumbleweed moments in the team's breakout rooms where no one really talked to each other as we had hoped. So we thought, the virtual shoe salon could be more than just learning about data. It also could be a way of fostering these conversations, and also, as I'll tell you in a minute, the things that the process engaged also could get them to learn so much more about each other and where they come from and what matters to them, which is really important as well in kind of generating cultural awareness. So I have previously done this kind of research with students in the classroom pre-COVID. I used Instagram as a research tool. So students would take their own photos. We'd have a lecture on qualitative research as an example, and then we do something interactive using Instagram where they would take their own shoe photos and say something, what does your shoe say about you? So when I came to develop the virtual shoe salon in the midst of COVID, its objectives were really to develop this very personalized, engaged way of learning about doing research and making sense of data. As I said previously, I really wanted to use the process to initiate dialogues around identity as well and create cultural awareness. And the salon has a pre-task research process which asks the students to take a photograph of their feet in their shoes. It can be a still life or a shoe selfie, if you like. So it's very much kind of grounded in the idea of the photo voice technique. So they are taking their own photo of a shoe that's meaningful to them or that they wear every day. And then I ask them to write a narrative about those shoes, so what the shoes mean to them and how wearing them makes them feel. So, and then they bring those to class and we use that to really kind of facilitate peer learning and then build peer relationships in the digital space as they get to know each other better and share their shoe stories. So when they've taken their photo and written their narratives, I ask them to post things using Padlet. So I've just got an example of the Padlet here. I just screenshot some of the things. So you can see there's quite an array of photos and some interesting things that they say about them. I've just got another one to show you here. The Croc is making a comeback. If you're familiar with the shoe style, the Croc, it's always incredibly controversial, but there we go. That's another story. So, and you can see they're talking about really fascinating things. They're talking about memories and experiences. So the shoe is there, but there's also the story around it. So we used Padlet to collect that data. And then we take them off and put them into a sort of more formalized data template within the breakout space on Teams. So this is one of the probably most emotive stories I saw in the first iteration of the virtual shoe salon. So this was a first-year fashion branding student who, you know, she talked quite a lot about how long she spent trying to get that photograph, her shoe selfie, right. So there was a whole process there. But also it's really powerful, the story about what the shoes mean to her, because she's recapturing, you know, her experience of coming first to Nottingham, meeting a new friend, going, as she said, on an awkward, scary shopping quest in Nottingham, and actually building a friendship, and then how these shoes have taken her through her kind of uni adventure. And then when it comes down to how they make her feel, you know, it's this idea of feeling cool, feeling kick-ass, the whole kind of androgynous style. So there's a real sense of how it shapes who she is as well. So there's her experience of what they mean to her and the story around it, but also how that feels. So it's very emotive and very powerful kind of a way of revealing these things that matter, this idea of what is the student experience through, you know, those first few months of a lockdown. And then the slipper was unsurprisingly a hugely important shoe style that's featured in the virtual shoe salon of 2020. And this is, I think this was a final year student who photographed these and talked about, you know, so I can't see it very well because my face is in the way, but I'm just going to put my face out of the way so I can see it. But yeah, so it reminds me of the time spent in lockdown, those uncertain times, but also the fun times. So I bought them just before coming back to uni for my final year. So they remind me this year hasn't always been easy. So whilst it's also saying a lot about the students, their experience, it's also very, very time bound of what is happening at a certain time and the impact that's having on those individuals. So I've got a few more, but I might just, looking at time, just move through those quickly. So some of them are very long responses, some of them are very short to the point, as is this one. And probably this one has all sorts of different approaches to the photographs. These are not all fashion students as well. These are some psychology students as well who are now partaking of the salon. But, you know, this idea of comfort and confidence, which is in this particular narrative, it has been a very powerful thing that's been shared through the salon of experience. And here, this one I feel is really emotive because this individual has sort of said how they feel socially awkward and how clothes make them feel, but the shoes never make them feel like that. So when I started this, I never quite imagined that sometimes it'd be very, very personal things that people would be really prepared and happy to share in ultimately, you know, quite a public forum with each other. So, and again, I just put this one up because of the word safe, and the word safe, safety, security was such an important one when we looked at the first 250 images and stories that came out of the salon in 2020. And I think it's very much relatable to the situation of COVID and the uncertainty of that time. So, that was kind of some of the findings from the salon. And then within the breakout space, obviously we started this in a virtual space. Now it happens, well, at the moment it's happening more in the physical space. So we get the students to really think about analyzing that data. And because ultimately I do teach in fashion and they're fashion students mostly, we look at the type of shoes they're wearing. Is there a pattern? How does that evolve over the time, the different time frames? They look at the brands. And then importantly, I get them to really focus on why things mean. So what are the meanings that they're drawing out? Is it about family, friendship, achievement, COVID, sense of self, and importantly memories, and then the feelings as well. So looking at those which are perhaps more intrinsic, linked to emotions, and those which are perhaps more extrinsic, which tend to be more about the look, you know, how it looks on the foot, and that may be more status kind of a thing. So so we get them to put these into a spreadsheet as analysis, and then start to look at the patterns. So I think in this one here, these are from third-year students. You can see how many times, this is only a very small snapshot of the ultimate data, but comfortable and confident is such an important keyword that's coming out. So we get them to think about, you know, why is it that comfort matters and confidence matters? So as they're in their collaborative conversations and they're really really thinking about making sense of that data they've shared with each other. They're really thinking about asking more about why is comfort important, why is competence important to those individuals. So they're probing deeper, and that process has been really great to think about how to deepen an approach to research, and also then from then how to make sense of qualitative data.
Naomi, 5 minutes.
Perfect, because I'm almost there. That's great. So I mentioned that the role of shoes as you know, repositories of memories. So memories, and the students here have built a thematic map from the data. Memories has been such a key thing that has come through the data so far, and we've looked at the ideas of nostalgia, and of course nostalgia is pretty timely during COVID. And there's also the social memories as well of things, you know, when they wore things, maybe friends have given it to them, that kind of experience. So they start to categorize things, so starting with a written narrative and image, and then building it into a way of making sense of it. Okay, so because it was really important to understand what value this process was to the students, we got them to reflect and think about, you know, what they've learned from it. And this psychology student said it's opened our eyes to the possibility of what you can learn from a shoe. And this particular student, when she came to the salon, she said, you know, I hate shoes. I don't know what to do this really. But anyway, she said, oh, well, I've got these running shoes on the floor here. So she picked them up and she went, you know what? I've achieved so much in these shoes. I didn't run before lockdown. I got them, I started running, and now I'm competing in you know, particular races. So I didn't think shoes mattered, but I suddenly realized what my shoes actually say about me, and they actually have my story and my sense of achievement. So importantly, I think it's great how much they felt they'd learned from each other through chatting and sharing the experiences, and that they also enjoyed it as well. So it kind of, what we found is that tumbleweed breakout room was kind of just ignited to life with conversations and sharing. We saw this idea of collaboration. It was fostering collaboration, that the co-creation of knowledge. They were creating, you know, a knowledge about identity, about experience, but also knowledge that was very time bound into the wider things that were happening societally. And this idea of building that sense of community through something that is relatable. Whatever you feel about shoes, it is a relatable object. So just to conclude here, I still run this project and this data set. Now we have about, I think, over 500 participants. So I've got huge volumes of wonderful images and really beautiful stories, and being able now to take it into other disciplines like psychology, and seeing its value, not just as a teaching tool, but also to generate data that students are creating themselves, but also then can continue to contribute to and actually use and work with. And also when I reflect on it, I see it as the creation of, I guess, if it's right to say, this kind of socio-historical document of student experience told through shoe stories, because it is very much, because it's longitudinal, it has that kind of, you know, relationship to what is happening in our world at the time. And I guess just it's been a really exciting way of just placing students at the heart of learning, and really seeing how much they get from it and contribute it, and how it becomes this fantastic kind of representation of them and their experience. So I will stop there.
Amazing timing. Thank you. Thank you, Naomi. That was fabulous. Thank you very much. Brilliant timing, everybody. Thank you very much for keeping your presentations to time, so that we can have a really full discussion now. Questions, etc. Feel free to put on your cameras.